In order to define, I wanted to understand, really, what do you mean for pattern of conduct? Because you concluded that it's a pattern of conduct. I would like to understand if, in order to define this framework, a pattern of conduct, is that important to determine the number of civilian casualties? How many civilians has been killed in the situation to provide you the concept to understand if the pattern, the pattern of conduct has been established. That's my point.
Any number, sir. I don't think it's a quantitative factor. The question is, based on the two absolute sovereign prerogatives. One, the absolute ability to go counter an insurgency, counter lawless behavior, and the absolute necessity at all times of directing government forces, in this case the Tatmadaw, against only those people without respect to the civilian population. That's the pattern. And the pattern is, as I went through the litany of things that happened in Rohingya places, that's the pattern. So if they had fired at refugees and all of them had been lucky and gotten away, they still will have committed that illegal conduct. If they had dropped babies in rivers and somebody had been lucky enough to get there and rescue them, they still would have committed that pattern of conduct. If they had burned down houses and there had happened to be a water truck standing by that showed up on the scene accidentally and put them out, I don't think the number of victims is relevant.
Okay, thank you.
I thank Judge Brand for his question. I give the floor now to Judge Human.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Professor Newton for his testimony today as an expert. My questions, I have two, maybe three questions in this regard. When you say authentic counterinsurgency, authentic, do you mean legitimate, legal, or something as opposed to a sham counterinsurgency operation? So I'd like you to explain more about this, because again, if you violate the law in your counterinsurgency, it doesn't mean it's a sham operation. So if you can explain a little bit about this.
I think in this context, sir, thank you, Judge, that's a good question. When I use the term authentic, what I was using as, you could say bona fide, you could say genuine, you could say, I think I may have said legitimate in places. And what I mean is one that demonstrates, that Tatmadaw clearly demonstrated the knowledge of universal standards of how to do counterinsurgency. It's in their rules of engagement, very clear. No mistake in that. With respect to activities directed against the insurgent, and on the flip side, activities directed only against the insurgent. And that's what I mean. It's a very clear marker. I'm either doing that and sometimes making a mistake, or I'm saying I'm doing that while I'm intentionally doing something completely different, which was my conclusion. So that's what I meant by legitimate, authentic, etc.
And then my follow-up question. If you target the whole population as supporters of the terrorists, or quote-unquote terrorists, can't there be a plausible reason for that? Meaning that in order to achieve the counterterrorism operation goal, you have to nip it in the bud, destroy the incubators. So your goal would not be for the operation to succeed, no matter what the means are. Would this make it a legitimate counterinsurgency or authentic counterinsurgency operation? Means, there's the population, their incubators, attacking to achieve my counterinsurgency operation objective against that group. Is it plausible?
If, as you say, attacking the civilian population, that's not plausible. There's never a military necessity for attacking an entire village, an entire population with indiscriminate fire, and as on this record, on these facts, also occasionally indirect fire, other weapon systems, so it's not just individual soldiers on the ground, which is notable to me because in the rules of engagement, typical of countries all around the world who are endeavoring to do good faith, and counterinsurgency is difficult. But the absolute prohibition on using other superior weaponry, mortars, helicopters, artillery, etc., without the approval of superior officers. So when a superior officer says, we don't know who's in there, we don't know what they are, but they're of that ethnicity, we're going to attack the entire place. And no, sir, that is not ever permissible.
And my final question is with regard to both your second report and your statement. I think it's a very similar statement you put in both. So I'll read in your second report. And you say the counter memorial does not refute this. Instead, it seeks to defend attacks on civilians on ground that the entire civilian population constituted the support base for ARSA. And then you refer to the counter memorial. I read the paragraph in the counter memorial in this regard. And my question, how do you deal when you have a counterinsurgency? And from your experience, when you have a base, how do you distinguish? And they don't wear insignia, military uniforms. They're within the population. Operation-wise, how does the military legitimately deal with an insurgency when faced with this situation? Thank you.
Well, that's a big question, sir. And there are many, many examples of that. That's why counterinsurgency is such a pervasive problem. And pernicious and difficult, and by definition requires partially a military solution. Sometimes that is the right answer, but a coordinated, the ICJ report issued in December 2016 pleaded with Myanmar to take a concrete, integrated political policy, they called it an orchestrated policy, to eliminate, as they say, the hopelessness and the despair. So one metric would be getting better intelligence collection. I mean, there's a quote in classic counterinsurgency doctrine that intelligence is both a medium and a means, right? If I'm floating around and more people begin to talk to me because they trust me, it tells me I'm doing something, but I also learn things. The rules of engagement in these settings and the Tatmadaw rules of engagement absolutely required discriminate force. It said you must always distinguish between enemies and civilians. So the trick is, in a counterinsurgency, disaggregating, disentangling those things. And there are many ways of doing that. One way of doing it is to arrest and prosecute and build criminal cases against the key leadership. So when you get a charismatic leader who all of a sudden is not in a position to do that, you begin to make hard choices. Another way to do it is to create incentives. For example, in this setting, I could have imagined people who had trouble getting NVC cards, who had trouble fishing because of curfews. We'll give you a fishing license if you will help us collect and find and disentangle people. There's lots of ways of doing it. And the other thing I would say is there's so many ways of doing it that are culturally dependent and situation, I say context specific, but it's not static either. The situation is always going to be dynamic, so you're constantly adapting and refining and honing. But the universal core imperatives, in military parlance, you would say the load-bearing pillar, the central mission always stays the same, which is to direct activities, all activities, against the insurgents and not the civilian population.
Thank you, Professor Newton. Mr. President, I don't have any further questions.
I understand